So let's get started. A 35% button opening range. We opened 35% on the button and our 3-bet. We need to defend 35% times 33.3%, which equals 11.7% of our range. So that's 11.7% of all possible combos we can have pre-flop, because we're only opening the best 35% of hands, and then we have to defend 33.3% of those 35% hands. We defend 5% by 4-betting, and we're going to assume that's a balanced range. So we're left with 11.7% minus 5% equals 6.7%. Now we decide to call 6.7 times 2% to make up for the fact that our opponent's free rolling. So we're now calling twice as often as we would have to, because we want to prevent the free rolling of our opponent. When you want to think about this in mathematical terms, that would mean when our opponent 3-bets to 9 big blinds and he gets his 3-bet bluff called, he expects to on average win 4.5 big blinds back, which is probably a pretty fair estimation. So for example, if the button opens, one of the worst hands I'll 3-bet bluff with usually is going to be like King 3 suited. And if I on average get back, half of my 3-bet when I get called, that seems about right. Sometimes I'm just going to flop a king, or I'll flop a flush draw, or I'll be able to just flop a board texture where I'm going to get a ton of folds. So getting about half my money back seems right, because also a lot of times I'm going to flop the worst hand and I'm not going to know it. I'm going to continuation bet and my opponent's going to call. So I think this sort of call multiplier I used here is very reasonable, but if you disagree, you can just slightly adjust it. It's not a big deal. We will now attempt to defend said range. So this is the range I decided to defend, and in this series we are going to talk about the preflop ranges a little bit more, whereas in my hour-long videos, I more of just say, hey, here's the range I'm defending, here's how we're going to defend on flops. Here we're going to actually discuss the range a little bit more. So as I already mentioned, Ace-Queen, it's definitely a hand that has a good amount of equity when you call your opponent's 5-bet. It blocks a lot of your opponent's hands when you 4-bet it, but for the most part, it's going to be better as a call. The same applies for pocket 10s. Still profitable 4-bets, but we wanted to call with them. So we wanted to basically just call with the best possible 11.5% of hands, and then obviously we would 4-bet bluff some of these suited aces that we're not calling with. So here's what I believe are the best 11.5% of hands. There's some things in it that are very debatable, which I want to point out, because this is by no means the correct answer, but this is just what I picked when I was making this video, what I think is mostly best. So 7-6 suited, 10-8 suited, King-9 suited and Queen-9 suited, King-Jack off and Queen-Jack off, and even a hand like Ace-4 suited, those are all, and pocket 6s, those are all very, very close to one another in hand strength. So here, personally, I thought King-9 suited was a little bit better than all these hands I folded, but I don't feel passionately at all about it. I could easily see switching King-9 suited for, 7-6 suited or Ace-4 suited. If you think that's a better hand to defend with, then go ahead and do that. You also want to make sure that the range looks like it will hit a wide variety of board textures, and you want to hit the board textures that are more likely to come. So for example, if we can't hit any king-high board textures, that's going to be a very, very bad thing. Since we 4-bet all of our ace-kings here, it helps to have the King-9 suited. We're going to already hit the Queen-high board texture very, very well, and if we miss like a 6-high board texture or a 7-high board texture, while that does suck when the board comes 7-high, it's obviously much, much rarer for the board to come 7-high than the board is going to come, king-high or jack-high. So missing 7-high boards here, it's not ideal, but I think they're rare enough that I'm totally fine with it. So now I really want you to take a moment and think about this range, because when you're doing theory, it's very easy to just, follow the math where you get to a pretty reasonable looking range and not think for a second and ask yourself, am I really defending a range this wide, pre-flop against most players? Because I know from my experience, most players are probably not going to defend against 3-bets unless they have a read that their opponent 3-bets aggressively with hands like King-9 suited, maybe even Ace-10 off or 8-7 suited or Ace-5 suited. Most players like to play quite tight against 3-bets until they know how their opponents play. In addition to that, most people are opening the button much wider than 35%. So you can see how it's very, very effective to 3-bet against people very aggressively until they are going to adjust to you and start defending much wider. And then even when they do start defending wider, they're probably also going to realize it's really hard to defend against good blinds when you're opening like 50% of your hands in the button, because you're just going to have to defend such a weak range. The range is going to be much wider than this when we use a 50 or 60% button opening range. So really take a moment and think about this and ask yourself, how close does this actually look to my range for how I defend against 3-bets most of the time when I am in the button, and how wide am I actually opening the button?